Right, it's 5 past on my side, so I think let's get started. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Workshop 2, straight from the source, real grad stories, real advice. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We are recording. If you've just joined us, you might have heard that we started the recording. A huge thank you to all of our speakers this evening for joining us. They are, of course, recent graduates. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you to all of our attendees for joining us. And of course, thank you, as always, to the SISA head office for just organizing this evening, ensuring marketing was done, links were shared well. I'm already seeing some comments come through directly asking, well, what if I missed workshop 1? We will share the link to the recording of workshop 1 in the chat in a little bit, but also if you just go onto the SISA website under the Career Campus series, you will be able to find the recording. So we've tried to make this evening a little bit more relaxed presentation-wise, because we found that with workshop 1, there were quite a number of presenters. We have slightly fewer just so that we can accommodate more questions this time round. We do, however, ask, so each presenter will get like 15 to 20, closer to 15 minutes. And we do ask that you try to keep all of your questions to the end. However, if the presenters are keen, you can ask your questions in the chat and they will try to address them if they get a chance. But please do stay on until the end for the proper Q&A. That's it from my side. I think let's get into the program for this evening. So let's start with Ravendri Govender. Ravendri, I think the SISA family know you very well, but I think you can do your own introduction this evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pakiza, and to the SISA office for having me. I'm just going to share my slides if that's okay. Mm. All right. Can I just ask if you can see my slides in presentation mode in full screen?
Yes, perfect. Beautiful
Okay.
slides.
Thank you. All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ravendri Govender, an educational psychologist and also the additional executive committee member of one of the SISA divisions, CASP, the Community and Social Psychology Division. So this evening, I'm going to share a little bit of my journey through psychology, starting from my studies all the way to, being a recently qualified psychologist. I've tried to keep this as raw and as unfiltered as possible in the hope that somebody will find something that's beneficial to them. I'd like to start off by saying that this is my journey, and everything that I share may not necessarily apply to everybody else, but I do hope that it does help at least one or two other people. So this is just an overview of my journey and, starting from undergrad beyond, all the way beyond qualifying and now in private practice. And I think I will touch on and start off specifically in my honors year, And the one thing I would say to anybody who is currently starting an honors degree or is, applying for an honors degree to start next year, be intentional in your module selection. You need to think long term with your honors in terms of what can benefit you in honors and both in masters. So for me, commencing honors in many years ago, without giving away my age, I think what helped me was to engage with my lecturers and my supervisors to find out what is it that in an honors year I will need to carry over into a master's year, etc. A big part of my honors year, given that it was a 1-year qualification, was the research component. And a piece of advice or something that worked for me was dedicating one day in the week solely to my research. even though if I had some time out throughout the week, I would add on to that. But I called it research Sundays. Every Sunday, I didn't work on anything else, but I worked on my research. And that is also where my journey with SISA Student Division commenced. I joined the executive committee as an additional executive committee member and got involved in almost anything and everything that I could get my hands on. And that was a great learning opportunity to see how the profession actually unfolds by engaging with more experienced professionals, but also to get my name out there, network, to understand that there is more to psychology than just your core psychology professions. And then following my honors year, I voluntarily did not apply for masters during my honors year, purely because I found that the honors qualification was demanding enough, and I did not have the capacity to dedicate the time and energy that a master's application requires. So I did not do that. And for me, that choice was motivated by the fact that I did not want to waste a master's application, knowing that I would not be able to give it my best. And during that, what I call a voluntary gap year, I dedicated my time to upskilling, attending free trainings, attending workshops that SASA would host, other workshops. I gained as much work experience that I could. I continued my volunteering. And I think for those students who are wanting to gain volunteer experience, be intentional about that. What it is that you hope to gain out of your volunteer experience. Think about quality versus quantity. Then moving on to my involuntary gap year number two. So in gap year number one, I commenced my master's applications, and due to external circumstances, family pressures, etc., I had pursued an application in master's in clinical psychology and was unsuccessful. And if I could be completely honest, I cannot tell you the relief I experienced when I did not get into that master's, knowing that a clinical master's was not something that suited my personality. It was not something that was for me. Therefore, in gap year number two, it forced me to really reflect on which scope of psychology really best suits my strengths and my personality. It forced me to look a little bit deeper and do that introspection, and forced me to have those hard conversations where I actually had to sit my family down and say, listen, I don't really want to pursue a clinical master's, and therefore applied for a master's in educational psychology. And that was where I was successful in my master's applications. But in gap year two, the main focus was reflecting on what didn't work in my master's applications first year in year one, but also looking at upskilling further, attending talks and trainings, being intentional in the skills that I want to upskill, focusing in specifically in my weaknesses and how I can go about further developing that, so that when I do eventually make it to a selection panel, I can demonstrate to them that I actively worked on developing my areas of weaknesses. Looking a little bit into the master's application one, as a first time applicant, I applied almost anywhere and everywhere, got into three selection weeks, which was extremely grueling as well. So what I take away from that is be intentional in the universities or the institutions that you are going to be applying to, because one does underestimate the amount of pressure, time, and dedication that is needed to make it through a selection week and to be adequately prepared. Okay, so be intentional. So as I mentioned, I made it through three selection weeks, but wasn't adequately prepared. So the second time round in master's application two, I only applied to one university, also taking into consideration, financial feasibility of a master's program. Would I actually be able to study at at a university that would require things like accommodation, etc. So I chose to, focus all my energy into one application and dedicate all my time and energy into ensuring that I was adequately prepared for that one selection week. I completed my master's at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, which meant that our selection is not as time intensive. It was a one-day selection, which consisted of a personal interview, a academic interview, a research interview, and a group exercise. Given that I completed my master's during the COVID-19 pandemic, my selection week was done online as well, which also brought about its own set of challenges in terms of making sure that I could convey what I wanted to say as adequately as possible online. In terms of master's training at UKZN, it was the first year was your typical M1 with your modules and your site placement, M2 being internship, and then what I would like to call M3, which was what, because I was unable to finish my research in my M1 and M2, I had to extend that into a third year, and then finally board examinations. That brings me to where I am right now, which is currently practice in private practice here in Johannesburg, which brings about its own set of challenges, which I'll get through in a little bit. Okay, so some of the key challenges that I experienced, I think the first one, as I touched on, is the choice of field. Following my honors year, I was very uncertain in terms of did I make the right decision in studying psychology because of the limited job opportunities that do present itself in that space. But what I did take away from that is that I need to become innovative in terms of what it is that I can do with a psychology honors qualification. Upon further research, I realized that there is a lot more than meets the eye. In almost every profession, some element of psychology and a psychology honors qualification comes into play. It's about how you implement those skills that you learned during your honors year that really does make a difference for me. Another key challenge was, balancing my studies versus my family commitments. I was faced with an intense amount of guilt when I having to say no or turn down to family commitments during both my master's and my honors year. And unfortunately, that is a sacrifice that you do have to make and, unapologetically apologize for it afterwards and make up for that lost time. And I think the biggest challenge for me was the transition, not specifically the transition from honors to masters, but the transition from undergrad to postgraduate, because the demand of the academic pressure was so much greater. It was and needing to work so much more independently. That was the biggest transition. And then finally in an M2 year, moving away from home, becoming more independent, etc. Something that, oh, I see there's an error on my slide there. It didn't save. Sorry about that. Something that was also a challenge in my master's years was the rejection sensitivity. Being so afraid to do something out of the ordinary because of, getting it wrong, those sort of things. And I was very fortunate that I had a supervisor that encouraged me to, push the boundaries as well. And another key challenge, lastly, was financial security. That financial instability that comes with, the transition between internship and, writing your boards, or I called it my M3 year. Trying to find a job, trying to ensure that adequate time was dedicated to research, but at the same time ensuring that I was adequately prepared for board exams and ensuring that I had the funding to actually apply to sit for a board examination. Because if I can be completely honest, board examinations are not cheap. So it's important that you bear in mind the long-term financial commitment that is required for both an honors and a master's qualification if you are not lucky enough to secure funding. So some of the lessons that I learned early on is to explore all forms of psychology. So, there is more to psychology than just your traditional forms of practicing as a psychologist. Consider the psychometry course, consider registered counseling, consider how you can use your psychology degree, become innovative of that. And then specifically when it comes to the master's application, I realized that my marks are one component of my master's application. It makes up only a percentage of the selection process. I needed to then demonstrate my capabilities during selection week. I needed to demonstrate my willingness to learn. I from reflecting on master's application one to master's application two, I realized that I'm not applying for a job. I'm applying for a position to learn. I needed to show my willingness to learn. I needed to show that I am aware of my weaknesses and I needed to show that I'm actively working on them. And for me personally, one of the biggest lessons I learned starting very early on in honors, and this came from engaging with students who completed their honors year before me, was choosing the correct supervisor and not the research topic. Yes, the research topic has to be of an area of interest to you because then it will motivate you to go on. But if you don't have a supervisor that's going to give you timeous feedback, is going to push you to give you your best, to give off your best, you're going to run into time delays. And bearing in mind that honors qualification is only 1 year, you can run into trouble. So a supervisor can make or break your research, specifically in your honors year, but also in your master's year. When you make it through a selection week, research the potential supervisors that with those at those institutions. Communicate with previous supervisees. Ensure that your topic is aligned to the supervisor's interest. They'll be more invested. And I think don't be afraid to push the boundary in your research. If you have an original idea and if you really can back it up, and if you're willing to go the extra mile and push yourself to actually make a difference, then if you're truly invested in it, fight for it. Be reasonable in that sense, but fight for your research topic as well. And then, I think if we look specifically at the master's application for me, like I said, quality versus quantity is one of the things that I grappled with. Am I able to give off the best of myself if I made it to 5 selection weeks? Or would it better to sit down and dedicate all my time and energy to one or two or three applications and then, give off my best at those selection weeks? Be intentional. Consider everything more than just making it into that program. Consider all the other logistical factors that need to be taken into consideration. Will you need to move away from home? How are you going to financially support yourself? Do you have an adequate support system should you move away from home? These are all the factors that need to be considered as well. And I think, like I said earlier, it's not a job application. You do have to demonstrate your competency, but you don't have to know everything. Bear in mind that you're applying for a position to learn. Demonstrate your willingness to learn. Be reflective. And, for the interview, preparation is absolutely essential. You need to become self-aware. There is no perfect answer. Ensure that you are thoroughly aware of your content, but also be prepared for the unexpected. For example, some of the questions that I got asked was, what was my 5 to 10 year plan? What was my short-term plan? What was my long-term plan? Those sort of things. They're wanting to see the longevity of you as a person in the field of psychology. So make sure you are able to answer those sort of questions as well. You are applying with your story. Tell your story. Control your narrative. And then ensure that you are, one of the challenges that I found experienced was in terms of transition was just going to feeling average again. Because when you make it into a master's program, you consider it being one of the cream of the crop, and now you're going into a class where everybody is now the cream of the crop. So I struggled with that, being one of the best to feeling average again. And that competitive nature can be used to actually fuel you to do better and learn everything that there is to grasp from a master's qualification. And lastly, I think you need to consider the emotional preparation. Rejection is part of the process. I'm not saying that you will be rejected, but if it does, you need to be prepared for that. Have a support system. Take time to, sit with that disappointment. Don't brush it off because it can come back to haunt you. Work through that. Speak to a colleague, speak to a mentor. Having a mentor in a field of psychology is extremely important because this process will test more than just your CV. It'll test your resilience, your ability to bounce back from an unsuccessful application. Or when you are successful, your ability to bounce back from criticism when it comes to supervision, etc. So you need to ensure that you are emotionally prepared and you're aware of yourself when you are applying and further than that. So some of the things that I wish I knew sooner, is that I had to become extremely creative. Finding a job with the honors was difficult. But also, the loneliness in a master's qualification, an often high achieving space, everybody around me looked like they were coping. And I felt like I was the only one that was not coping. And what I wish I realized was it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to speak to my colleagues who I'm studying with. 9 out of 10 times when I expressed something, they were also in that same boat. And it sort of provided us with a support network in our master's year where we could lean on each other. It's ongoing learning. When I initially entered M1, I felt like I needed to know everything. I needed to demonstrate competence, which is important, but I needed to grant myself that grace to actually grow in this role. And now moving into private practice, the thing I struggled with was shifting from learning content to applying that skill. You are on your own without a safety net. And so I had to learn how to become confident myself in applying. And then lastly, learning that burnout doesn't always look dramatic. It could just be, that emotional numbness that comes with the pressures of a master's, M1 or an internship. Yeah. Something that in terms of networking, I think, it's very important to network. And I found that networking maybe for me might have started too late in my honors year, and I wish I had started earlier on, because as much networking you can do is very beneficial to you. It helps you build a support system. It helps give you mentors. You can get advice, get involved in psychology beyond your academics. SISA is a perfect place for that. Some of my close colleagues and friends who are on this, who are presenters here today, we started off volunteering in SISA together in the student division. And it allowed us to develop a support network for us as young professionals as well. Something else that I thought I would be worthwhile mentioning was supplemental income. Find a way to, build in some sort of income stream in your studies, whether it be honors, your gap year, or in your masters. I know time management can be a little bit tricky with this, but you have to think long term. The period between graduating and qualifying can be extremely financially taxing, so you need to make provisions for that. And like I said, professional registration is expensive, and you need to consider that long term, because you do need some sort of bulk cash when you do get to registration. There's a whole lot of other fees that come along with it as well. And then lastly, exposure matters. Start building yourself, start getting yourself involved in networks, not just for the sake of adding it to your CV. Actually invest your time, get involved in the practical community experience. It's an invaluable learning experience as well. So, some takeaways from my early career experience now as a newly qualified psychologist. If you're thinking of going into private practice, you are the receptionist, you're the administrator, you're the bursar, you're the therapist, everything. You do it all in one, unless you're lucky enough to have a full admin system. So if you are if you do have some time between writing boards and registration, etc., familiarize yourself on systems, on how admin works, how the finances works. When it comes to tax, when you're paying tax twice a month as opposed to a monthly tax, familiarize yourself with those systems so that when you are entering a private practice setting, you are well equipped. It can be very daunting, and for me personally, it was very daunting to enter a private practice setting, without all that background knowledge. And lastly, or secondly, the power of peer supervision. Something that I struggled with was always, asking for help. And I found that finding a support network of newly qualified psychologists who were in the same boat as me really helped me express my vulnerability and express when I needed help or guidance. Thirdly, professional mentoring. I was very lucky that I found a mentor very early on in my SISA journey and my psychology journey, through SISA and through volunteering in organizations like SADAC, etc. And that has become a safe space that allows me to, as a young professional, to actually go and draw on those many years of experience that my mentor has. So if you can find somebody who is willing to give off their time to you, it doesn't need to be in a formal setting, but engaging in those on and off conversations about things that are happening in psychology and the workings of a psychology professional can really go a long way. It provides you with that reassurance that somebody before me has done this, I can do it too. Um, and then, as a newly qualified psychologist, a young professionals network is really important. Finding people who are in the same boat as you, who are, trying to navigate these private practice networks, or trying to figure out registration, etc. It really does help to have a set of young people, and this just does sometimes form organically when it's you are looking at your master's colleagues or your internship colleagues or those sort of things. And SAISA Student Division is a great platform for you to start building this young professional network as well. And then just before I conclude, I think something that my early career experience taught me was just because I'm newly qualified doesn't mean that your input is not valuable, especially if, as an educational psychologist working in a school setting, etc., when you're working in a multidisciplinary team, don't be afraid to, do your research and share your input. You are coming in with a fresh perspective, an objective perspective. You, as a student, you are now up to date with the latest research, which is very beneficial. So stand your ground, fight for your clients that are worth fighting for as well. And lastly, find your area of interest, find your niche. For me, that is autism research, and I invested a lot of time and understanding to actually explore that niche, and also bearing in mind that your niche can change time to time, but something that you would love to do that sets you apart from yourself. Go and do the trainings that are tailored to your niche so that you can start to build up a unique clientele for yourself as well. So,
Thank
yeah, that's my story
you.
in a very short nutshell, and I've hoped I've helped somebody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ravendra. You covered so much and it was so reflective. Thank you so much for being so honest with us and sharing the challenges as well, not just painting it as this wonderful, easy journey, but really sharing your challenges as well. Really, really appreciate. I think as you can see, lots of heart coming through. I think the audience really appreciate it. Uh,
Thank you
I'm
so
sure
much.
there's questions for you, but for now, just for time purposes, let's move on to the next speaker. But Ravendra is going to stay online, everyone. So she will be available to answer questions later on. On to our second speaker. We are so glad that you made it in time, Lynn. Um, Thank you for joining us. I'm going to just share your slides from my side, so you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank
But I'm ready to go.
you. Yes.
All right, the floor
Oh,
is yours.
thank you so much. It is always difficult to go after Ravindri, and I am one of the colleagues who she referred to in mentioning that we started off as babies in SISA. Um, but I'm going to take you through my presentation, because if I don't, I will go so off tangent, it's not funny. But I am going to try highlight post honors because I think, as Ravendri has said, and we share so many similarities in our experience, but that's when things started becoming quite difficult. Next slide, please. Okay. So at the honors level, I did apply. So in the first that year, I applied to WITS, I applied to UJ, I applied to Stellenbosch and UKZN. And I share Ravendra's sentiment. You are going from a class where you are one of the top achieving students, um, and I only received two interviews. And in terms of rejection sensitivity, you might think that you are, and you know, I generally thought that I was someone who was able to take criticism and rejection pretty well. Um, but it's very hard when it becomes academic rejection and you are a high academic achiever. So not getting interviews or not getting placed is pretty difficult. And so I was very lucky that in terms of help seeking, I thought, if I want to become a clinical psychologist, the best thing to do is to, you know, if I'm feeling this way about being rejected, let's start therapy. And so I didn't get in that first year, and it was a difficult pill to swallow because, in being honest, very many of my good friends and colleagues did get in, whether it was for clinical counseling, educational, and it sometimes feels like you are being left behind. And I was also stuck in this situation of, well, what now? I definitely wasn't in the position to not work. So I just took on whatever I could. And at that point, thankfully, having the skill set I had, I was able to work at a startup. And I don't know if any of you all have worked at startups, but it also involves doing everything and anything. So you are the marketing manager, you are the sales manager, yeah, you are the administrator and so forth. And I started there, but it also allowed me the freedom to, next slide, to branch out. And so I had weekends to do counseling courses and evenings to do counseling courses. And I threw myself into volunteering. I began volunteering with SEDA KZN, as well as I had been in the student division as just a member earlier on, but I was then brought onto the executive as an additional member. Um, Ravendri and I ran a support group together for a year, and we were very lucky having so there were branches of SAISA within KwaZulu-Natal, and so we had Mr. Santosh Pillay, who actually referred patients out of the tertiary psychiatric hospital to our support group. So this is where we learned hands-on skills, your therapy, your counseling, and so forth, in an environment that was still very supportive. And I really attribute learning counseling skills to that because no matter how many courses I did, it was so different to sitting across someone for 90 minutes. And sometimes we didn't have the best attendance. Sometimes there were two people in a group. And they still came there. They often weren't of a high socioeconomic class. And so, their time is just as important. And I learned so much from that. And another thing was project management work. Um, that was largely the work that we were doing at SEDA KZN, whether it was putting together community talks, going out into communities and giving talks. Um, Eventually, it has now culminated in Ravindra and I, together with Mr. Santosh Pillay and Prof. Savira Ramlal, running KZN's biggest mental health walk every October. And so some things that you build then are not just for that period in life, they do continue. And some of them will actually fill your cup more so than the training will. Um, so much so you might even fight to keep them going. But you learn so much about yourself in these detours. And the detours are as important as the academic training, if not more so. Allow yourself to do things that you didn't think you would do. And I'm not saying put yourself in compromising positions. Please don't do that. But explore other avenues. I know I also went down the avenue of thinking, "Oh, if it's so difficult, like, should I consider something else?" And I had a second major of industrial psychology. And initially, I went into university thinking I was becoming an industrial psychologist. It was only, I'd say, in about second year where I was like, don't know about that so much. But even at that point, I considered myself go back and do another honors in industrial psychology. I didn't close off my options, but I stayed focused on still wanting to get into clinical. And I was a bit different to Riv. I still applied widely. And I kind of learned the styles of the universities. So we can go to the next slide. So before we just get into UKZN, I applied widely in my second year. There were a couple of there were a couple of rejections before having the interviews. Um, but there were a lot more interviews that year. Um, some interviews will not be formative in any way. You might not find that you get any feedback, or the criticism that you receive might not be constructive. I know sometimes you get comments in interviews that are very hard to process. Um, I'm lucky I didn't have too many traumatic interviews, but as I was saying, I didn't focus on like almost preparing for one interview. However, you do learn the styles of the different universities. Um, but I must admit, while I say I don't have too much trauma, I can still remember clearly one of the profs at Wits saying to me, "Ah, Richard, you back again. Why?" And that will always be something that I'll laugh about for a very long time. Um, but as Ravindra said, UKZN is a very different experience. It's a very shorter process. It's a single day, and I find it quite, it's quite difficult to see whether they either get the essence of who you are, but it's also merciful in a way because it's not a whole week of being, put through, am I getting through, am I not, which can really be anxiety provoking, guys. And so just consider your own mental health in the process. And then I was accepted at UJ and UKZN, but this is where things come into play. You need to consider things like family, things like costs, and I didn't know that the next year we would be locked down in COVID. But in terms of my responsibilities, UKZN worked out the best because I knew I wouldn't be earning an income and I was not able to self-sustain in Johannesburg. And so I learned a lot about myself in my master's year. Um, and in saying that, it is a journey, just as much as it is a journey about academics, it's a journey about learning about yourself. You require extensive time management, and even if you're a good time manager, it can be very difficult. Um, and there is a lot of criticism, some of it good, some of it not constructive, but at the same time, it's about learning. When you go for your master's interview, they're not looking for who is the best psychologist. That would mean you're not trainable, you're not teachable. They're looking to see who is teachable. And that is very important. Accept when you don't know. Um, ask questions. Ask for help. The one thing I needed to learn was that it is fine to ask questions. It's also fine to look stupid. Because if you constantly want to look like the smartest person in the room, you're not going to learn anything. Um, you're really not going to learn anything. And it speaks to you not being able to open up and not being able to be vulnerable. And I think it's very important if you're going to sit with someone in a therapy room, you need to be authentic. So you need to also be vulnerable in the process. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So I progressed from my M1, which I had mentioned was in COVID. I do hope no one has to face doing a master's in COVID. And I would say that that had an impact on my whole master's process. So M1, M2, M3, and might I add, M4. which we will get to just now, um, I was placed at the Durban Hospital Circuit. Um, and I had the opportunity to learn about short-term and long-term psychotherapy, a lot about risk assessment, so managing suicidality. Um, I didn't have a lot or any exposure to forensic work, which will be interesting when we get to my ComServe. But I learned a lot about the medical interplay of diagnoses and a lot about neuropsychology. And this is where having a good relationship with your supervisor is so helpful. Not everyone gets that experience, and I do hope for your sake that you try cultivate it. It only comes through open and honest communication, humility, um, trying your best to present well within your supervision sessions. Um, we can go to the next one.
I'm so sorry, Lynn. Can you maybe try wrapping up on this one?
So I was unable to complete my research in the period allotted. So you have 3 years registered as an intern, and I had to do a 3 month extension. So I did my 3 month extension, which was unpaid. And that too, it can shake one's self-esteem, and often people don't go back. But I think I owe that to having good supervisors who really just said, we are rooting for you to finish. I managed to do my community service in Pietermaritzburg, where I then learned a lot about forensic work. And I am now doing, um, I have a part-time private practice, as well as lecturing, as well as doing research. So, if anything I can give to you is that you must try to keep as many opportunities open. Private practice is quite difficult, as Ravendri has noted. You are your billing person, your admin person, you answer the phones. Everything lands on you. You need to be able to cover rent, malpractice insurance, HPCSA fees. And so try and make sure that you have other streams. And I think that is what I will leave you all with.
Thank you so much, Lynn, and apologies for needing to cut you short there.
No
But
problem.
again, everyone, you can hear like Lynn and Ravendri, similar stories, but also so different. And again, Lynn, thank you so much for sharing your story with us.
It's a
And
Thank you,
being so
Lisa.
adaptive as well. And showing us how you can just it's just a detour. Like you'll still get to the final destination. And in any case, qualifying is not that final destination. There's still so much more.
There is a
Um,
lot more to go.
but thank you so much, Lynn, for sharing your journey with us. Timothy, welcome. There we go. I can see your camera starting up. Okay, we can see you. I think we can hear you.
Perfect. Yes, I think I'm gonna carry on. I don't know if this was intentional for tonight's theme to be the fact that the journey in psychology does not go according to plan. At least, yeah, not in my colleague's case, not in my case. It definitely, you have a plan when you leave matric. 10 years later, you look back and you have no idea how you gotten where you've gotten to, but yeah, so for myself, I entered the lesson stream of research psychology after my honors year. So a bit of a background for myself. My general timeline is that I will reveal some things about myself is I matriculated back in 2013. And this first little notch in my timeline speaks to a wider theme of mine that I still struggle with to this day is when ambition outraces sense. Is a big theme of mine. Yeah. So when I left matric, I realized psychology is something I wanted to pursue. And I just, for some reason, over at Tux, they have this course, Bachelor of Science in Human Physiology, Genetics, and Psychology. And I decided that's what I want to do. I'm not interested in human physiology, I'm not interested in human genetics, but I saw this Bachelor of Science thing at 18 and I just went with it. And it was the completely wrong degree for me for many reasons. And basically, and there's a whole 5 hour story of other life things that happened during that period. But what it ended up happening was that a few years later, I essentially had to start over and begin with a BA. Majored in English and psychology, and I kept the dream of pursuing psychology and went into my honors. And similar to my colleagues, I took a break in my studies as well. I'll get into that. And then somehow I decided found my way into the Masters in Research Psychology stream, did my internship at Caprisa, was then employed at Caprisa, and we'll cover that later. And currently where I'm at, similar to Reventry, I'm also over in Johannesburg, working over at Wits RHI. So that's a general timeline. Again, it looks beautiful on the slide and neat and put together, but if it was realistically drawn, it would be much more colorful, much more messy. But I'm so grateful for everything that happened along the way. So my postgrad journey, I got into my honors year and I met some truly amazing people. And I did the thing. I was a good student. I had to start working jobs for income. I remember it was funny. I remember at the beginning of my honors year, I remember one of our lecturers gave us a speech about the fact that just because we're working doesn't mean we get special treatments. Um, and that we mustn't be expected to be treated like children. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, no, I'm trying to actually not be a child anymore by having a job and studying and doing all these things, improving myself. Um, but that was also one of the lessons I learned along the way is you have to have a strong sense of self. You have to remember why you're doing this because whether it's lecturers, whether it's interviewers, whether it's friends or even family, people are going to have comments, and sometimes the comments are going to sting, and they're going to make you doubt yourself and your journey. So something that really took me through my various obstacles and milestones was the sense that I knew this is where I'm meant to be. As you know, as motivational speechy as that sounds. But in my honors year, I did the things I 10 of my modules. I remember they took in too many of us, so there was the option of not doing a full dissertation. You just had to do a proposal, and I was like, no, I'm doing a full dissertation. I want the full research experience. I joined the student societies and groups, and I was working two jobs because I needed to become financially independent for a variety of personal reasons. And then it came time for master's interviews, and I realized I needed a break, actually. And I don't know where this sense came from, but I just remember this tiredness of looking around and I don't know, it's hard to explain, but there was this internal sense of I just need to take a step back and stop being a student for a bit. I need to exit the psychology stream for a little bit, and I need to just I don't know, do some self-exploration and identity formation. And I was just tired after fighting for these positions and grades and I was like, actually just I need a break or I'm going to go into these master's interviews resentful. I'm going to go into them burnt out. If by some miracle I actually do get into masters, which I probably wouldn't have, being as burnt out as I was, I would have gone in for all the wrong reasons. And I know masters is very valued and privileged, but you still have to make sure you're going in for the right reasons. So I took a break and then I realized I needed to know who I was outside of being a student. And then, as mentioned by Lynn, COVID-19 hit, and my honors graduation was on SABC 2. Um, it was very quick. It was very interesting. The dean of the university it was like one sentence. He conveyed qualifications to everyone, and I had my honors. And that was it. And I made a cup of coffee and I just went to sit down and I had my honors. COVID-19 was a very humbling time. But while I wasn't studying, I was working two jobs. I was lecturing and then I was also working as a freelance editor, both of which, I don't know, I'm very grateful for. It was kind of like it was meant to be because they both kept me, even though I'd left being a student, I was still firmly grounded in academia, which is a place I have a passion for and a love for. Lecturing, it was a private university and I was lecturing higher certificates and diploma students, so I didn't require a master's, which was very lucky. And also working in editing academic manuscripts. So I was often, for example, scientific researchers from Japan or the Middle East, basically people whose first language wasn't English, but they wanted to get their articles published in English journals. So I would edit for language, for formatting, and it kind of exposed me to this other side of academia that I hadn't really been exposed to before, this more knowledge production, the world of research. And then came my course correcting. I went in with the desire to either do clinical or counseling. And I And I realized when a few years in, about 2022, I realized it was time for me to apply to masters. I just felt at the right time. I'd gathered up experience. I joined SISA, had work experience, had life experience. I felt ready to face the master's application process head on as a well-rounded individual with a sense of self and sense of self-esteem now that I had done all these things and looked after myself. But going into the process, again, I just had to listen to my gut, and I realized clinical counseling, it wasn't what was calling me anymore. It was that love of research and that knowledge production and that kind of that area of academia that was calling to me. And so I began, well, I applied for a master's in research psychology, did an online interview because I was at that weird end of COVID phase where everything was half online, half physical. We did the interview, they asked me a range of questions. If anyone here ever applies for master's in research psychology, hot tip, know the difference between inferential and descriptive stats. I don't know why, but that is a question they ask right at the end. It seems to come out of the blue, but that is, it'll come up. But it was basically, it was something I realized I needed to do. It was the direction I needed to take. Now, a very important slide because the very first question you get when you talk about the fact that you've done a master's in research psychology is, what is research psychology? Because it is not the stereotypical avenue we think of when we think of psychology. Um, so just some quick definition is just applying research methodologies to identify, monitor, evaluate societal challenges, develop interventions, monitor programs. So it's looking at these gaps in knowledge, these societal challenges, whether in mental health, public health, and applying quant methodologies, qual methodologies, to create programs, interventions, work with stakeholders, and address these challenges head on through this process of knowledge production. And then if you're lucky, you get to go to a conference and stand up in front of like a bunch of really accomplished people and feel very good about yourself. But the main point is you get to see how the knowledge you produce directly impacts the community. So it's taking a step back from counseling and therapeutic approaches to working with groups of people and addressing those more. If I can relate it to anything, it's kind of like the community psychology module, although a bit different. Um, and it can be used in what's very interesting, and again, it kind of also adds to the dispersion of the identity of what it means to be a research psychologist. It adds to the confusion. But you can end up in a range of areas. You can end up in the field of education, like myself. You can end up in public health, you know, mental health. You can end up in marketing. If you really, really want to make the big bucks, you can end up in marketing. But with research psychology, the skills are applicable across a range of contexts and a range of fields. It just depends where your passion lies. Um, so the actual master's process in research psychology is you apply, you write up the application, a research topic, and you do your interview process. First year is your coursework, so you do your modules, your qual module, your quant module, monitoring and evaluation. And your second year is your internship if you want to become HBCSA registered. You can get a master's in research psychology without going full HBCSA registration. But then my thinking is, what is the point of doing all this work and having all these nervous breakdowns if I'm not going to take it and become fully registered. Plus, there's very few registered research psychologists in South Africa. Um, and there are some pros to being HPCSA registered. You get to mentor other research psychology interns, which makes you more appealing to research sites. And then you also have your dissertation that's to be completed ideally over 2 years. But obviously, yeah, life sometimes it gets in the way. So your coursework, it's quite a familiar year as you get thrown into your modules. Mine are online, but they try to make it as interactive as possible, but it is more hands-on. You often have to run programs, you have to monitor. We worked, for example, one of our projects was with Gift of the Givers in Pietermaritzburg. We went there, we held a focus group with each of the volunteer counselors, and through some rapport building, after some icebreakers, we basically held a focus group and with them generated ideas on what extra training and skills they feel that they need in their roles as counselors at Gift of the Givers. So an important part of this kind of research generation and my personal passion is that the data, the information, it comes from the people themselves. We're empowering people by giving them a voice, and I'll get into that a bit later as well. So your internship is 1 year. You can do it at different sites, but you have to spend at least 6 months at each site. You need to do it for the HPCSA registration, and it basically throws you into the deep end of the research world. There is no coddling. Do not expect coddling. They have needs, and they will throw you into wherever they need you. You require a registered research site and a supervisor. The registered research site, you can get some wiggle room as long as you have a registered supervisor that the HPCSA recognizes. You do not necessarily have to have a registered research site, as long as you have a supervisor signing off that the program you're following is adequate. And then, like every other stream, you do your board exam, and then eventually get your HPCSA registration. So my experience was the coursework was remote, even though COVID was over. It was a very strange experience. I worked on my dissertation, and I was lucky to have a very great supervisor, Nicholas Munro. A lot of my classmates had very negative supervisor experiences, which is very unfortunate, but it does happen. My dissertation topic at the time was South African media narratives of the LGBTQ community. My second year, I began an internship at Caprisa. So the reason I ended up at Caprisa is I have quite a close relationship with UKZN. So they often take research psychology interns. So me and a few classmates ended up at Caprisa, and we were all kind of scattered about. So Caprisa stands for the Center of the AIDS Program of Research in South Africa. They do a lot of clinical research focused on HIV prevention and sexual reproductive health. I was placed into the little qualitative department that I've been slowly building over time. And yeah, although it was an internship, I was working. There was no difference between me and an official employee except the title and the contract details. I was thrown right in, straight into. There were projects starting, studies starting, clinical trials. If I was not ready for the amount of paperwork and filing, yeah, no, the world of clinical research is never going to let go of paperwork. And then also, a few months into me being in this department, my mentor, the person kind of heading up the department, left. So it was me. And then a new study came in, and I was like, oh, okay. I've just left my coursework year, just started here as an intern, and now I'm kind of starting up the whole study. And that study, if hopefully everyone's keeping up with the news of the lenacapavir injection, 6-monthly HIV PrEP injection. It was the qualitative study attached to the clinical study. So we interviewed adolescent girls and young women who were receiving the injection prior to it being approved by the regulatory bodies, asking about their experiences with the injection, their experiences with their partners, their context, their cultures, their communities. So it was very powerful work, and I'm very proud to have been part of it. At the end of my internship, I was very lucky to be employed by Caprisa as a research assistant. And again, I carried on what I was doing. Again, the internship was no different than just being thrown straight into the job. And then I began a PhD in public health as well. So that's what I'm currently doing now. Because the study at Caprisa allowed me to use their data. So I said yes to further pursue my studies. And then The fun part, I was retrenched last year thanks to DT. You figure out the initials. He's orange. He's in America. He's in charge. Basically, what happened was he canceled USAID funding pretty unanimously. And the projects I was working on were all funded by USAID. So therefore, no funding, no salary, no position. Um, where I am at now is I spent a few months unemployed. Um, and thankfully, through the various projects I'd worked on at Caprisa, Tess Pelony Phillips over at Bits RHI knew of me, and when a position opened up here, I was lucky enough for her to invite me to interview, and I got the position. I'm now working as a qualitative research assistant over at Bits RHI, and my current duties include, so they ask you, what do you do in a day as a research psychologist? Lots of admin, lots of emails, lots of paperwork, writing grant proposals, doing some data analysis, consenting participants, data collection. Let me tell you, it's very difficult as a Dermanaut to consent Johannesburg participants simply because I don't know most of the areas. So they'll say these areas I've never heard of, and then I have to keep asking them to spell it. And it creates a very fun dynamic for about 15 minutes of them spelling out basically every word on this form that I have to write out as we're consenting them to join our studies. Um, I'm currently pursuing my PhD in public health using that Capisa study. I'm a co-author on 2 published papers, which I'm very proud of. It feels great to be published because something else I'll mention just as I'm ending off here is that people have this idea of research as you sit behind a desk and you type and you do research and it's nice and quiet. It is not. There's this thing called the race to publish. You have to be publishing, you have to be applying for grants, you have to be meeting goals. When the study ends, you have to know where your funding is coming from next. You have to be applying for different organizations, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Gilead, and you have to keep working, and you have to keep publishing, and you have to keep producing. Um, and the world of research is very fast-paced. It's much more fast-paced than you think. I'm often out of breath in a given day. And then just to end some challenges, there was the burnout, there was the study break, there was working 2 jobs while studying. I had to move from Westville to Pietermaritzburg. And when I worked at Caprice, I worked at their rural site. So when I tell you I worked with the cows and chickens, I am not exaggerating. I was out there in the mountains, but I wouldn't trade it for a single thing. It was amazing. It was a beautiful experience. The retrenchment, let me tell you, it was identity crushing. Doing all this work and then to be let go just in the blink of an eye was something else, but and carried on. And like Ravendry said, because of the networking, because of putting myself out there and working with others, I was able to get my next position. Successes are learning much more than I ever thought I would learn in the classroom. Working in the field of public health has been incredibly, incredibly valuing to my life. And I'm very grateful for everything I've contributed. I met the most incredible colleagues. Sometimes the system of public health is exhausting and burning out, and you want to just run away, but the people I work with are amazing. I have grown personally and professionally, and I think this goes across all streams. I've learned that I can handle much more than I ever thought I could. So yeah, to end, like I said in the beginning, it did not go according to plan, but I'm very grateful to be where I'm at now, and I think I'm trying to still maintain my identity as a psychologist, even though I moved to the world of clinical research, because I think that's important. And making sure that I carry that with me throughout my professional career. And yeah, so research psychology is often forgotten about stream, but it opens a lot of branches, and gives you a lot of skills you can apply to a lot of different areas, and it lets you do a lot more good than you think. And if you're a kind of person who doesn't want to sit behind a desk and who likes a fast-paced environment, trust me, the world of research is very fast-paced. I was often doing a lot of cardio, running up and down, chasing files, trying to find people to create errors. You get a lot more cardio in doing research than you may think. But yes, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Timothy. I really appreciate you covered so much. So happy that somebody is representing research psychology. So so very nice. And we actually have some people in the chat, Rachel, asking to share your work. So I think while Willem starts sharing his story with us, he's just going to talk to us. He won't have slides. Timothy, if you're comfortable, please drop your links to some of your publications in the chat. But thanks again for joining us this evening. Willem, over to you.
Thank you very much.
We can see you and we can
great.
hear you.
Thank you for having me on this platform. I think it's a wonderful opportunity and a privilege for me to be with you all. And I can also say that I've been there on this call, on the other end of this call, and I'm acutely aware of the anxiety, maybe the hopelessness, maybe the fears, the disappointments, and so just to recognize that, and then also say that I think being in spaces like this is exactly right, and well done for making time and showing up in a space like this just to hear others' stories, and I'm so aware that there are many more stories in this on this call than those few of our stories being shared. So I mean, having said that, a little bit about my story. I live in Cape Town. I'm an outdoorsman. I love being outside in the mountains, hiking, running, cycling. I've got 2 dogs who might come say hello. I'm a counseling psychologist. I'm also the chair of the counseling psychology division at SAISA. At the moment, I work at SAICAP in the Dean's office. I'm also a lecturer and a research supervisor. And then I also have a part-time private practice. So a little bit about my career. I got a bit of a fright when Timothy said he matriculated in 2013. I matriculated in 2008. And I am a relatively freshly minted counseling psychologist. And so maybe you keep that in mind as you listen, as I share a little bit about my story. And there's definitely been a theme of, a journey. And I'm also aware of just the name of the series being a compass. And so there's something to think about there. My first degree was a degree in sports science with psychology as a major. I then went on to do an honors degree in biokinetics, and then I started my career as a biokineticist, and I was a biokineticist for about 10 years. And I'll come back to that part of my career a little bit later. But that ended up being, just a really good decision for me. While I was working as a biokineticist, I pursued my honors in psychology part-time, and I think about a year after my honors, completing my honors, I started applying for masters. I went through 3 rounds of applications. I also applied widely, and so there were many rejections along the way, which is also a part of this, unfortunately, a part of this journey towards registration. I'm very wary of giving advice, and I think there are many platforms at which you can receive advice, and I think you've received a lot of good advice this evening already. And so really I want to share just a few principles with you, and encourage you to take the ones that are useful, to leave the rest behind, and take everything you hear with a pinch of salt. So my first sort of principle is I encourage you to start with why. it's the most obvious question someone will ask you as you start pursuing this career is, well, why are you pursuing a career in psychology? And it is a simple question, but the way you answer that question reveals a lot. Um, and so I encourage you to really just think about why it is that you are pursuing this career, and to have a better answer than because I want to help people, because there are many other ways in which you can help people. And so be clear on your why. The second one is to know your story and know where you come from. Steve Jobs spoke about this idea of dots, everything being a dot. This evening's experience is a dot. Being retrenched is a dot. Getting married is a dot. All our experiences are dots, and life is about connecting the dots. But in order to connect the dots, we have to look backwards. We can't look forwards, and so there's a balance to hold there. And knowing your story is about looking back and being able to connect the dots, and understand how it is that you arrived where you are. And when I talk about knowing your story, I'm also talking about identity, whether that be your personal identity, your identity in your family, um, your community, your culture, your ethnic group, your belief system. All of these dots form a part of your story, um, and it's really important for us to be able to know our own story and to understand how it is that our stories have shaped us. How do we connect the dots? My third principle is to develop a reflective practice. And yeah, being in therapy is not the only way for us to develop or to start connecting these dots or to be reflective. I think it is a way. I think it's a really good way, but there are many barriers, one of which just being the most obvious is cost. And so I encourage you to number one, develop your own reflective practice, but to invite others to do that with you, and whether that be formal, informal, a mentor, a spiritual leader, elders in your community, reach out to people and get them to start, get input from them and share your story with them and include them on your journey. The fourth one is, sorry, grab a sip of water. The fourth one is a Stoic principle, which is to know what you can control. And even though this is not a physical space, like I said earlier, I'm just aware of the pressure and the stress and the anxiety of the journey that you're on. This is not a race. Take your time and don't waste energy fighting things that you can't control. Your preparation, your persistence, your attitude, these are things that you control versus selection panels, limited spaces, other applicants, the bureaucracy of the system. Be really clear and intentional about applying your time, your energy, your attention onto those things that are in your control. My fifth principle is to deploy your skills. I'm sure many of you may already have finished your honors degree or on your route to starting an honors degree, and then kind of stuck with feeling, where to now. And so the first thing to do if you want to deploy your skills is to be really clear about the skills that you already have. before just trying to, add skills and add skills. So take time, identify the skills that you already have, and then start using those skills and use those skills in your surroundings, in your communities, um, volunteer, get involved somewhere. Ideally, you'll be able to deploy some of those skills, maybe in an entrepreneurial sense, or possibly a different career. But know what those skills are and how and where you can deploy them, and then an encouragement to use those skills in your community, wherever that might be. The sixth one, which I'm sure you've heard many times already, is to prepare to fail. This is not being pessimistic, but to remove the shock, and to strengthen resilience. And like I said earlier, I was a biokineticist for 10 years, and my approach to pursuing a career in psychology was always for that to be my plan B. And so I set out to establish myself in a career, to start earning money, to start deploying the skills I had, in a field that I was interested in, and it was still in the same family of of professions, at least. And so what that meant is, through my 3 years of unsuccessful applications, not once was I stuck wondering, what am I going to do next? How am I going to survive? What career am I going to do now? I did it the other way around, and first sort of established a career. And then I had all of this breathing room and space um, to pursue my professional qualification. And for me, that was a really good decision in the end. Also just being able to have the space to ask, what's the worst that can happen? And if that happens, how will you respond? The seventh thing is to read, stop doom scrolling, get off social media and all of that pop psychology that you're being exposed to. Read widely, read philosophy, read biographies, read history, read African history, Western history, Eastern history, read about war, read about ideas that you don't agree with, and develop your critical thinking skills. Use the scientific method that you've learned. Be open to learn. Develop your own ideas, and then be willing to learn how to disprove those ideas. These are the skills that we are hopefully learning in our tertiary institutions. But it's a skill that we might not identify immediately. And the best way for us to develop that is to expose ourselves to ideas we don't agree with. And we do that by reading. And then, Keys, could you share my slide, please, as I close?
Will do.
Thanks. Right, so I'm Afrikaans. And so, yeah, I'm sharing. This is my one slide I share with you, and it's a play on words. And if you're not Afrikaans, I hope it lands. I'll try my best to explain. But in Afrikaans, a career is called a loopbaan. Right? Career loopbaan, but loop, the word also means to walk. And so the antithesis to loop, which is walk, is ren, which is race. And so this is a principle I learned early in my career, is that our careers are not racetracks, right? They are pathways. If you look at the racetrack, it also starts and ends at the same place. And so we can get caught up on this racetrack of just zooming around and arriving at the same place every year. And maybe for you, that's, applying and failing and applying and failing and waiting for your life to start only once you've been successful. But I want to encourage you that you're not busy with a race, we're busy with a loopbaan. And that means we we take things easy and we walk. It takes a long time. You enjoy your surroundings. And while it is important to start with the end in mind and to be persistent and have a goal, don't lose sight of where you are. And so the maybe to bring it full circle, there the photo of the path is in the Cedarburg. It's one of my favorite places. But that's somewhere where a compass would come in handy. And using a compass and a map also helps us to see that there's not only one way. There are many ways for us to get where we want to be, and your way might look a little bit different than somebody else's way. I think I'll pause there. Thank you for listening.
That is amazing. And what a way to end. I think, you shared so much with us, but my takeaway is how much such a simple slide, um, for those of you who don't know how to do presentations or wanted a little class in doing presentations, how was that? How something so basic as a single slide can have so much impact. Thank you so much, Willem. And with that, we have now spoken with all of our panelists. So thank you to all four of you. Really appreciate you sharing your stories with us. And yes, it was not an easy path or a simple straight line path that some of us might go into. Like, when we start undergrad, we think it's a straight path to get into masters to become psychologists. And I think all four of our panelists tonight really demonstrated with their own experiences that is definitely not the case for the majority of us. So really thank you to all four of you for sharing and being open and honest with all of us this evening. Now I think we get into the part that some of our audience might enjoy quite a bit, the Q&A section. So I believe that everyone does have the ability to unmute themselves, but given we are a fairly large group, I just ask that you please raise your hand first, before just unmuting yourself, so that not more than one person unmutes at a time. And yes, I think if you have questions for a specific panelist, please just then mention that in your question. Layla, you can unmute yourself.
Hi there, guys. So I've been studying part-time through uni, so I literally just got my qualification. My graduation is in July, and it's been 6 years of part-time studying for my undergrad. So you can imagine how excited I am to finally be done. Um, but what my query is I noticed that everybody's studying at in-person institutes, places like UJ, WITS, UKZN, all of that. I wanted to know what kind of value the UNISA courses hold when it comes to applying for honors and masters at those other institutions. Because UNISA's offering for honors specifically, and then obviously masters, is very limited when it comes to psychology.
Do we have a panelist? I'm not sure. I can speak to that. Oh, Willem is putting on his camera. Willem, go for it.
Lala, maybe I won't address your question directly. Maybe I'll speak in more broad terms towards the category of question. Well, let me start by saying the UNISA honors degree is definitely recognized. That's definitely not something that will count against you. It's SACWA registered, and there are many of my colleagues who, also for practical reasons, working, living, starting a psychology career later on in their lives, opted to do that part-time. In a more broad sense, maybe something I want to say is that there's a race to try and unlock the secret code. That one thing on my application that's going to make it stand out, whether that be your transcript where you did your qualification, where you volunteered, how old you are, whatever. It's endless. And one of these things, maybe from my perspective at least, that's out of your control is on whose desk your application lands. And all of the universities have got different selection panels, they've got different selection processes. And depending on where you apply and where who actually receives your application and whether it's before lunch or after lunch, um, something like that just it might not really matter. Um, from a regulatory standpoint, if you meet the minimum entry requirements that are laid out by the different institutions, then you are eligible to apply, and that will be the SAQA registration, and then the minimum entry requirement in terms of your academic transcript. I don't know if that directly answers your
It
concern.
does. Thank you. That helps a lot. I've just, studying part-time, you get a little bit unsure about whether like you can actually progress further. So that really does help. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the other panelists tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Leila. Any other questions? Not seeing any hands. The same place where you would react instead of like clapping or giving hearts, you just raise your hand in the same area. There we go, Alex.
Hi. I'll just choose one of my questions. Basically, long story short, I started with psychology a very long time ago. I couldn't financially sustain staying in that program, so I left and then found myself in the video game industry and stayed in there for many years. Now I left the video game industry and I'm back at like figuring out my life, and I'm drawn again to psychology, and I picked up psychology through UNISA now just to check if I still understand things and if this is still aligned with where I want to go. So I have a lot of interests, and I kind of want to combine psychology with technology, maybe going into digital therapeutics or working in sort of like on system level problems like societal issues and things like that. So I was just wondering what I can, because I'm at UNISA as well, and you can't really combine a tech or data science type of course with a psychology course at that institution. So I was just wondering like what types of courses I can do in my free time to complement psychology if I am looking into a non-traditional path with psychology. I don't know if that makes sense or if anyone has some advice.
Making a lot of sense, Alex, and I think you're not the only one on the call to even be asking that question. Um, yes, and it's not a question that has like one answer, although I must say, and this is not tongue in cheek, I do mean it. Our next session is exactly this. People who started in psychology or maybe have like their honors or masters in psychology, and then they took a different approach. So that's some brutal marketing for our next session there. But yes, I think like what I think Willem just in his discussion just now, you need to find what works for you. Maybe finish up if you are currently with UNISA, finish up the degree at least, and then look for what works for you. I can see all of your questions there, but just like what something is is behavioral analyst a career path that you can go into? Um, Short answer would be yes, but probably not with just the degree, or you'd likely have to add on a few additional models, but it also depends on the organization that you're in, like how much of a psych background would you require? I do see Timothy's hand is also up, so Tim, over to you.
Yeah, I think your head is in exactly the right place for where every industry is heading at the moment. Like we see with the incorporation of AI into just about every industry. I think we can't ignore the growing impact of digitalization, especially within psychology, whether it's in counseling or research. Like even recently, doing this qualitative analysis, and the head of the site wanted to go fast, and she applied AI to do a thematic analysis, and it made my skin crawl initially. But this is where the world is heading. We cannot ignore this, and I think it's a great entrepreneurial kind of mind space to be in to see how can we combine these emerging, because we can't ignore them. So I suppose to sound like a lecturer, you could do a literature review, see kind of what is out there, see
Yes.
what people are doing. Maybe not a literature review. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Around PTSD. But just look at what's out there and what's being done. Just do a search, see how these things are being implemented within the field of psychology, whether it's in research, whether it's in therapy, whether it's in something else entirely, and start networking, get on LinkedIn, and just look at what's out there and what's happening, and see where you can insert yourself, and also see where you can add, where you see a gap in the literature, basically. Keep running back to these lecturer talking points. But I think your mind is, and I think your experience is going to be incredibly valuable for the field. Because like gamification and these novel ways of interacting with people, I think is really important because we know that completely traditional methods don't work for everyone. And we need to constantly innovate and change and grow as the world grows. We can't ignore how the world is changing. So, and in terms of extra courses you can do, there's Udemy, there's all various recognized online courses you can look at. Looking at those extra certifications. But I think as a starting point, just yeah, do some research, see what's out there, and start looking at the kind of names that are cropping up and who people doing similar things in terms of digitalization and psychology. Just start looking at the trends and seeing where you can add. Focus on getting your qualifications sorted. Because once you have that behind you, it makes everything else just much easier. It gives you that credibility, that kind of grounding. But I think, yeah, I think your head is in exactly the right place. Even myself, trying to, because I do mostly qualitative research, so I'm not very much in the human data. So applying AI to that, I just wanted to, I couldn't make my oh, and I was like, no, we can't do this. But it's to ignore it is burying our head in the sand. And it's a tool that we can use just like any other. So if you can find a more effective way of integrating it within the field of psychology, is a great plan. And again, just look out there what courses there are, and don't ignore that side of your interest that, and focus entirely on just psychology. If your interest spans elsewhere, continue exploring that. It can be within the university setting, whether if there are modules and extra courses available. If there aren't, there's always other places to look that you can apply to. And just be careful of burnout with that with that same advice.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, like I say, I think where your head's at is amazing. And it's exactly what the field needs right now. So
Cool.
best of luck and welcome back to psychology.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for the answer.
Komatsu.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can, thanks.
Yeah. So I recently graduated at SACAP for BPsych equivalent, and I am registering now to become a registered counselor. So I actually want to do clinical psychology, but I heard that it becomes even more difficult to get into clinical if you are a registered counselor because it appears as though you are confused, you don't know what you want to do. I don't know if this is a myth or what exactly, but I really, really want to go into clinical. So any advice on that, or is this a myth, or does it really kill my chances to be accepted?
Can I have a stab?
Go for it.
Um, yeah, it's not uncommon question, but I think again that sits now in the realm of us trying to figure out exactly what it is, what the panels are looking for, and what they've decided. And so I can start by saying, no, that doesn't automatically disqualify you from pursuing a clinical master's. I think what's more important is your understanding of the journey that you've taken so far, the experience that you've had as a registered counselor um, or the training up until this far. How does that set you up or prepare you for a career as a clinical psychologist? Um, and that's something that everyone can think of. I mean, you could, if you were had experience, 5 years experience as maybe waiting tables, and you've reflected on that, you could use that experience to speak into being able to listen to people, being able to regulate, working under pressure, anticipating needs, diffusing angry customers, whatever it is, any career, there are experiences that we can use to inform where it is that we want to go. Now, what I don't think looks good on the application necessarily is when it's set up to say, well, yeah, I'm a registered counselor, but I want to do clinical because I think that's better than the qualification I have. So I'd be wary of that kind of approach. But in our cohorts, there were many registered counselors, and if anything, I think that kind of experience and training is almost an advantage. And again, to come back, the B-Psych and the B-Psych equivalent are legitimate alternatives or options other than just the pure academic honors. And again, has given you skills that might set you apart from other candidates.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so Humotso, it is a myth that if you're a registered counselor, you won't be able to get into Clin Masters. Like William's saying, yeah, it does depend on the specific course and what they're looking for in that cohort. But I think Lynn is also saying, like, she has colleagues who are also registered counselors. Also, the details to the SISA student division in the chat earlier. Reach out to them, but also reach out to the registered counselors and psychometrist division. Within that exco currently, there's a number of individuals who are duly registered as psychologists in a number of fields, and they're registered psychologists, registered counselors, sorry. So maybe, reach out to the divisions, and then we can put you in touch with specific individuals who have walked the path. And you can hear some more stories from those sources if it helps at all.
Will do. Thank you so much.
Amazing.
And just add on that's a perfect example. Like you've got a plan A now. You've got registration. You're a registered counselor. Now you can apply, but you don't necessarily have that stress of not having an alternative. Like you're in a really good position, and now give yourself time and space, and not so much pressure, because you already have a registration now.
I see a comment in the chat, Nosipo. I'm not sure if you maybe want to unmute yourself or if you want us to read out your question. Okay. I'll just read it out. I want to ask if you have completed honors and you want to apply for masters. Is it allowed to you? Are you allowed to use your research proposal topic that you have done in a research module to apply for masters? Our panelists who have applied for masters recently.
From myself, I can't say if it's allowed or not, but you have to justify why is that topic of value? And you have to demonstrate in your proposal in your master's application how you are able to demonstrate research skills and how you're going to explore that topic. So it really depends. If it's just because the application process is stressful and brain is feeling fried, then I would say find a new topic. Because they're gonna grill you on that topic. You're gonna need to demonstrate that you've thought it through, that it has value, that you've done the research, and that you would be prepared to carry out that research topic if it became your dissertation. Versus if it's right now it's just you're exhausted from honors, maybe, and you just are out of research topics, don't do it in that way, they will grill you. They grilled me on my topic. They asked me very practical questions that I was not prepared for when noting my interview for my research master's with my proposal topic that I put in my application. So again, you just have to be prepared to defend that topic and be able to pursue it if it were to become your actual dissertation that you were then going to pursue.
Ravindra, you have something to add? Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, I think just to add on to what Tim had already said, I think you also need to look at, is your current honors research topic that at a level of a master's, dissertation or master's research topic, or the proposal rather? You consult your current, honors supervisor or your honors research lecturer, whoever you have access to, and find out how you can extend that topic into and mold it into a master's level research proposal and research topic, if that is really your area of interest. You can always extend a topic, but I don't think, it would be wise to just duplicate it into a master's level. You've got to think about the level of the qualification and what it is that they're aiming to assess and those sort of things as well.
Oh, thank you, Ravindra. We have time for one, maybe two more questions. Again, just very quickly while I'm waiting for hands, I have to do my blatant marketing again. Please join us on the 21st of April, same times, also a Thursday, for our last workshop in the series this year. We can a psychology degree take you beyond the traditional path. This is going to be, we have quite a lineup of presenters here as well that we're really excited about. And yes, so please do put this in your calendars and do look out for the registration link. It is already on our website. But yes, hope to see you there. I thought I saw a hand. I lost the hand. I think we're just saying then I think let's maybe close the evening then, if there's no more questions.
Thanks, Pakisa. Thanks to all our presenters. On behalf of SAISA, another successful workshop in our series, and we look forward to the final one. Just watch our social media and our website for upcoming events.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.